Hello, everybody. To have you here with us, Alan, for the 8th edition of the of our idea shots. We have all our drinks this time. I don't know if the screen is showing my drinks, but my drink, but it's warming up the whole discussion and the whole technological setup that it's giving us some troubles from time to time. Today's show is going to be focused on a very challenging topic, which is called the future of communication. And we have here with us Alan from Discovery Research from UK. Alan is a long-term partner of ours. I don't know, Alan, for how many years we know each other, but I think there are a few.
Yeah, probably double digits.
Yeah. We met in an international project where when I visited London and I visited the Discovery's offices for an international project that Alan and his team was coordinating. And since then, we continue to work together in many projects from London to Bucharest and from Bucharest to London. So we exchanged clients and experiences. And along with us, my permanent partner in this idea shots, Alec. So we kind of build in communication, we shorten the distances and we build this connection. Today, it's Bucharest, Frankfurt, and London. So good to see you, Alan.
Yeah, and you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, and Alec.
Hey, good to see you. Good to meet you, Alan.
Yeah. So because we have only 30 minutes for such a challenging project, such a challenging subject. And as I said, we will discuss about the future of communication and what is a situation of 2020 is bringing us to as communicators and as researchers, as a sociologist and anthropologist and so on. Today's debate is going to be focused on that, on what's going to happen to the human interaction while we are going surfing through this situation and after that. As we were saying, we embrace a lot of we are embracing a lot of remote communication these days because we are forced to. If somebody would have told me that tomorrow I will be fully online as a moderator, I would have said, no way, I hate this. I hate talking to heads of the people and so on and not being able to feel their bodies. But look at me, where am I after almost 8 months, or even, I don't know, 7 to 8 months. The idea is that we were forced to go into this remote communication, right? It's a situation that we had to deal with. But while doing that, people and us as well discover some very interesting things about us. So the idea is that at some point this will stop. The whole situation will end. Will we continue to do so? Do you think so? We will preserve some of the things that we have learned and experienced during these times of remote communication. What do you guys think?
I think it's sped things up. I think there was a trend which has been accelerated, and the situation we find ourselves in has really sped up some of those interactions which perhaps were going to happen anyway. Others feel a bit more forced and a bit more of a step change. You mentioned moderating online. Again, there are things that are in place that have just been accelerated. So I think that we've found some really positive aspects that we can look to embrace. I think there are challenges which everybody, who has found themselves in this situation are now having to adapt to. But I think there's some really interesting positives and challenges around this. But I think that the change is here to stay. And I think it was a trend that was happening anyway, but this has really sped up the process. Aspects that maybe won't stay, but I think as a trend, it's certainly kind of gone in that direction from my perspective. Alec?
I would like to add something to this, and I think that what's important to remember is that for those of us, for example, who lived and worked in transnational environments or corporation, there was always a room in the offices where, or 2 or 3, in which you go and you remotely connect with New York or wherever is your headquarters. So that existed already. Was it accumulating dust? I don't know. It depends on the company. But it was used. The new thing that happened here is the moving of this communication into the domestic space for business purposes. You had the domestic communication by distance, and that happened especially for people who were forced for different reasons to work far from the family. Those are people who right now suffer the most from COVID, but they are very used with remotely communicate. If we talk about the global case of Southeast Asian maids who are literally most of the time on the phone talking with their family through remote, and that happened before COVID, and they're very used to that. And you have the corporate white collars who would be used to do remotely communication from the office. Now these two worlds kind of merge, these two worlds. And that's very interesting, because also COVID made us aware of the existence and the complication of different forms of life, let's put it this way.
So it's not actually about being remote. It's actually about being closer through communication, closer to what life is all about. So it's not, this remote word should be replaced with something else, you know? For me, for example, in communication, in research, Alan, that we are facing this in research as well. To me, at the beginning, it was like, okay, I cannot get to the emotions of these people, and as I used to. But still, what was a plus is that I can get into the houses of these people in the same time, you know? And when we were in the kitchen, in the living room, kids were around, zooming around. So the remote got us closer to people, in fact. And to be honest with you, after all this will end, after all this, what's happening is gonna end. I want to preserve this, you know, having access somehow through remote communication to the real life of the people.
Yeah, and I think the other aspect of it, from certainly from a UK perspective, a lot has been discussed about our politics. Brexit is a big thing that has divided our country and communities. But one of the aspects that we've always kind of struggled with face-to-face is you kind of go to certain spots within the country, and even within international work. You know, we have to argue about budget and travel and the location. But the great thing about being kind of online and a change in communication that we have, and the adoption of platforms like we're using today, is that geographic boundaries are largely removed. So I can now reach communities and people that I would not have spoken to as easily, that were harder to reach when we were doing everything more face-to-face. So I think an adoption of that as a benefit is a real positive for research perspective. But also it links to what Alec was saying about kind of, you know, the domestic side of things, and those people that are perhaps more isolated, as long as they have the connection, and there is another discussion about kind of communities that don't have technology, but if they have connection, then perhaps this has taught those kind of people that they're not as isolated as perhaps they think, to their families, to their community, with things like quizzes and experiences that we've all looked at online. I never thought that I would be doing a whiskey or a wine tasting or a cooking class online. Certainly not myself, but with a family member who is based they're very distant from me as well. We're sharing experience. So I think there's kind of those aspects to embrace, as well as kind of bring some of the other interactions back into our repertoire.
Mm-hmm. So coming back to the initial question, will they stay with us? Yes.
Yeah,
Alex.
I would like to, if we can further a little bit, because this is really interesting. And I think that, so this is for the moment the games, but I think first of all, I want to put a little bemol on your optimism, Adina. We will not go back to the status quo ante. This should be very clear, because the virus doesn't go away. The virus will be here somewhere.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll have vaccination. Hopefully most of the people will accept to vaccinate, and so on and so forth. But things never go back to status quo ante. That's a very Western way of thinking.
So
we perceive everything that changes. Every change is perceived as a problem. We have these two kind of, and we're talking business now, we have these two ways of looking at things and institutions. Oh, we embrace change, but at the same time, every change is a problem and we want to fix it. What does it mean, fix a problem? Go back to status quo ante. Well, then how will you do the change? Right? Mm-hmm. So I think this is a great occasion for us to rethink what we frame as a problem and rethink adaptation. And we are talking forms of adaptation right now. And up to now, we had all the pluses, and we see how worlds merge and collide, and perspective, like domestic communication, very, very technological able, especially for lower income or migrant workers. Merging with the white collar workers and office type of communication. What do we lose if we lose completely? Let's say we lose completely human touch, human presence like physical presence.
Mm-hmm. That was actually taking us into the second topic about things that we lose. That it's a lot being said about losing the real connection that allows empathy, emotions, the body language that transmits so much, because we are working only with half of our body, depending on your height. It's like half of your body.
I would say even less, because there's no smell, there's no touch, there's no feeling. Yeah. I don't know what perfume you're wearing, or if you're wearing any perfume, right? So
yeah, exactly. Talking only about body language, the things that you transmit with your movements and so on, not precisely the smell and all this energy that you feel when you really meet people. These are the things that it is being said that we lose. Yeah, because definitely they manage to transmit a lot more from when we are facing a person. How can you describe, how do you describe this loss? How do you feel it as a human, as a person, not as a professional, what can you say about the way you feel this loss?
I think it's a really big challenge, because I think this is where the gap exists for people. You can laugh, you can cry, you can share experiences and emotions, but there is still a big gap. And I wonder also whether there's a more worrying, I don't know whether the right word is worrying, but whether there's a trend towards a loss of kind of cultural identity as well, which is perhaps a trend to consider, that the kind of cross boundaries that we're talking about as an advantage actually brings everybody to that same sort of average, and that loss of the kind of cultural identity in the way you greet somebody in different countries or different areas of your own country, again, those experiences and the body language of different people that you're not experiencing as much. So there's a conversational loss, and from a research perspective, an interpretive loss. Perhaps you can try and plug it with different features and exercises for sure, and there are other things we can do. But it is a loss that you have. But also, I guess there's a wider point that I see, which I think maybe is a kind of question or observation for Alec as a kind of social anthropologist, which is that kind of cultural identity. Is there a danger that is a loss there, and we're bringing everybody to the same average? I don't know.
That's definitely a very interesting question, is the virus as a leveler. But if you look at different countries and the way that each countries or each geographic region reacted to the virus, what kind of measures they put in place and how people practice those measures, you still see that there are a lot of difference from the simple act of, whereas you have the motivations of wearing a mask are very interesting, because in Asia, and I was in the beginning of the pandemic, I was living in Hong Kong, and wearing mask was something that people would do anyway during the how do you call that, during the flu periods. And also the motivation of wearing the mask is one that it's oriented towards the other, is to protect the other from my sickness. Mm-hmm. And then all this was transmitted towards the West, and in a more individualistic key. And then wearing or not the mask became a whole conversation about individual freedom. Mm-hmm. You cannot have, no matter what you do, you will not have a leveling of cultures. However, what is important to remember is that cultures are not blocks that do not communicate. They're very porous and changing and borrowing from one each other, and so on and so forth. So there will be definitely different ways of greetings. There are already different ways of greetings, but do all culture greet with their feet? I don't think so. And in Middle East, they will never do it. No. You know how you touch your foot to say hello. And that's a no-no in the Middle East. And they will not adopt it, right? So, and so on and so forth. So each culture will adapt and interpret in proper own key the movement.
Mm-hmm. So you think that we will, that talking about what Alan was saying, I was coming from, when we met all this in the project, in the international project, all these Western cultures and so on, everybody there is kissing 3 times. And we in East Europe, we are kissing 2 times. And I'm not from the same world, because I stopped at the second kiss and so on.
Well, see, it's not even everybody, because West is not a block even. French kiss 2 times. I lived in France many times. Belgians kiss 3 times.
Yeah.
Some other people kiss 1 time or at all, and so on. So
but, I mean, I know that you were saying that let's not think about going back to the normal. So probably these 3 or 2 or 1, it's gonna be. We are gonna wait for that to come back, and maybe they will never come back. And how do you feel this social interaction will actually change? I mean, eventually we will kiss at some point, right? After the vaccine and so on, or
I hope so.
Or the kiss is not coming back, no? Yeah. We will kiss screens, so and feel something about that. It's gonna warm up the screen and sending us vibes and so on. Do you think it's gonna be possible for something?
I think I didn't do this study, but anthropologists sometimes we say laughingly that in order to understand the culture, you need to understand its humor and its pornography.
Yeah.
So I think if you look at these 2 things and what happens in humor and in pornography, you see this kind of new type of of trends, and I remember there was an article about the increase in sales for sexual gadgets, right?
This time.
Especially during the lockdown, and the increase of traffic on porn sites. And then there's the whole production of pornography that immediately adapted to this kind of like masks wearing and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I didn't do a study. I cannot tell you what really happens there, but I think there is, at least in this part of the world, there is a lot of self-centering. Somehow the virus reinforces a certain culture of self-centering. At the time, places that are really oriented towards self-centering, like gyms, are closed or partially open. So there's all sorts of things happening, and it's really early to say, at least for an anthropology, where would that go for an anthropological view? Where does it go in long term? We need to remember that a human being in the 50s is not, in 1950s, is not the same as the human being in 2010, because things happen in between, and we adapt, and we forgot things there, like even technological things that we're using in the 50s. Somebody in 2010 does not know how to use them. See the funny examples with rotary phones and kids looking at the rotary phone, what do I do with it? and we kind of accelerate this right now, because we put more and more technology. It will solve our problems, it will not, but it transforms us. In what?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's guessing.
Alan, how do you feel that?
I think the change in behaviours is a kind of a more obvious one, and I think that is something that remains, and we adapt to quickly as humans, and we've shown this over the course of the last year. And I think that goes back to the earlier point about it accelerating current trends. I think behaviours is one aspect. I think values is another very different aspect. And I think that's where we are kind of, there is either a step change or we are slower to change. And I think we're caught between the two at the moment, that if the pandemic continues for much longer, I think we will probably see a change in values as well as behaviours. But I think at the moment we're kind of at a bit of a tipping point where, in almost one of your comments earlier, Adina, you gave away your values, that kind of desire to see things kind of, to be back moderating face to face, and that kind of that loss aversion that comes from that. And I have the same, I can't wait to have that interaction back. But the longer it goes on, the more we've adapted, the more maybe some of those values and opinions we hold about kind of the body language, the loss of things, we adapt and we overcome, and we just change too. So I think our behaviours are changing at the moment. Our values are still dragging us back to the old way of doing things. So it's I think we're at a point where it's going to shift and change in the next few years.
I will take this because it's like heading towards the subject of what's the impact on research on humans and understanding humans and so on. I think that besides this issue with values, I think it's even deeper than that and more scientific, I would say. I think it's really about chemistry of your brain rather than it's actually changing the chemistry of the brain might drive changing values as such. Because as you were saying, I can't wait to see and feel and smell people again in research. And so, because I really think that that's giving us a lot of understanding. It's easing understanding of what is going on and what people feel much more than what we do today. As you were saying, we are trying to bring drinks, to, I don't know, make jokes, make those talking heads laugh and interact with each other and so on, feel more at ease, like communication, real communication makes you feel. And at the beginning, discovering all this technology, it was like a release of dopamine and serotonin and whatever it's in my brain and so on, but hugging somebody kissing somebody. With this porn example that you're giving, Alec, I would give another one more like homie, the increase of I kiss my kids so much they cannot stand me anymore, like all this time. Or again, in Romania, I think that it also happened in other countries as well around the globe. It's an increase in sales of the pets in the house. Like everybody's buying a pet to feel that, because you can hug animals now, but you cannot hug humans. Animals are less dangerous than humans, And I think that this one is also chemistry. It's about the oxytocin, the love hormone. So talking about the loss, we are losing a huge part of the love that is pushing things forward and makes our life worthwhile.
That you mentioned pets, and it's amazing. I mean, you talked about values and changing values, but there are always values that change and always values that stay as fundamental human values, like dignity, need of love, and things like that. And when you talked about pets, I remember immediately my mind went to Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. And if you remember, there was a disabled, one of the characters was a mentally challenged person, I guess. And his desire was to love. And he was hugging mice till he would kill them. Right? And he did that with a human being too. But you realize reading the book that that's a very fundamental human need. That and if you don't have the many cultures have the expression of when you love somebody, you say, I would eat you, right? Which is also the expression of that need of incorporating the other to becoming the same, which is really interesting. That's one thing. The second comment that I want to put is that a lot of times our analysis of the West is too unitary. So for example, what COVID does in a way, it legitimizes something a trend that already exists in the United States for a very long time, but not in Europe, which is the distancing and the not touching. Anthropologists will explain the fact that each culture have social distance that is acceptable and not. In the US, it's much bigger than in Europe. And it has been for a very long time for very different reasons that has to do with environment, pioneering, culture, etc. And the stereotypes of Americans about Western Europeans is they're very much, they're too touchy, they're too, and so on and so forth, and masculinity is involved and all these kind of things. And now this kind of distancing somehow legitimize and push further that kind of American way of being at a distance, because the distance we keep right now in supermarkets in Europe is the distance that you keep anyway in supermarkets in the United States. I remember when I moved there in 1998 and I was hearing people saying, excuse me, and I was like, with whom are you talking? But for them, they were talking with me because I was less than 2 meters from them, right?
Interesting.
I was already in their space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that happens now here. So we'll see. That's why I'm saying is if you want to have a medium and long term, you need to observe first before jumping into any type of conclusion. I'm very curious what will happen when the vaccination hopefully will start, when the general vaccination will start, because that will have a good indicator if there is a desire to go, or where the desire to go to the status quo ante is, and where the desire to preserve what we gain now is. So I think the next stage will be a pick and choose. People will pick and choose what they like from now and what they like from before.
Yeah.
But it will never be exactly as before, and it will be never exactly right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because we are getting closer to the end of the discussion, I would put the last question, adapt a little bit compared to what we prepared, is because taking into consideration what Alec has just said, I would challenge you with this question. From all this situation and all these times that we are going through right now, what would you, Alan, preserve, keep? And what would you want to disappear and get back, like recover?
From my perspective, I think I agree with Alec that it's a real pick and choose thing. And what I would pick to keep would be this kind of the lack of geographic boundary, the inclusiveness of being able to reach the harder to reach people. And I really like the idea that some of the older generation have seen, because they've been forced, but seen the benefits of online interaction, from shopping to communication. And I think we can absorb and adapt that. And I think our human to machine interaction, or human to computer interaction, is increasing. And I think that that's really exciting as a researcher to adapt to look at machine learning, to look at AI, to see what additional layer that can bring to us. But also I would want that to add to what we're doing rather than replace it. And I think we might see that the focus group, for example, or face-to-face interactions of whatever sort, a co-creation or workshop or IDIs, becomes much more important almost, that you do less of them, but they become more and more important, but they're not the only answer. And I think, beyond that, there is a foundation of other research that we have adapted to, and we're looking at bringing into everyday projects that perhaps is maybe a little niche at the moment, implicit association testing, things that kind of look to uncover the system one thinking, as well as some of the more discursive elements that are perhaps a bit more considered reactions. But I'd like to see, and I think maybe it's going to happen, we have more technology to help us understand bigger and broader trends. And that on top of that, we add that layer of real kind of, the jewel in the crown becomes the discussion group, the focus group. Because that's where we see those other interactions at play. And perhaps that's, for me, that's maybe a little glimpse into the pick and choose I have at the moment. That's
very exciting what you said, Alan, and I would add to that to the focus group, and because of everything we talked, is that in research, and any type of research, be it scientific or research for market-oriented research and so on, I think we realized right now how important is observation.
Yeah.
Just simply observation. We have no budgets, we have so much budgets for questionnaires, but questionnaires are not giving you what happened, are giving you already an expert view about what happened. So simply observation and being trained for observation is not a joke. It's very, very complicated, in fact. But looking at things, as Goethe, I'm in Frankfurt, and I would like to quote from Goethe. He says something like, thinking is much more interesting than knowing, and much less interesting than looking. Yeah. Looking is the first step towards thinking, in fact.
Yeah.
And I hope that there will be more budgets given to simply observation, to just hang out and look what people do and note what they do and learn how to note what people do, because we're talking about kissing, and an unexperienced observer would say, oh, these two people were kissing.
Mm.
That's not good observation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you did not describe it. Do they kiss 2 times, 3 times? Do they kiss on the cheeks? Do they kiss on the nose? Do they kiss on the lips, on the eyes? What exactly kissing means? It means approaching that. So there are all these kind of things that are really important and I think relevant for if you do market-oriented research. You really need to observe. And then go observation, focus group, interviews and questionnaires at the end when you want to get like bigger trends and stuff.
Yeah. Let's hope that in the business segment, people will learn, this business sector, people will learn also from this to have patience, to allow thinking. Jumping into conclusion. Yeah, allow observation and then thinking. I would add to all this that you've said, which I definitely agree. I would add this, I would like to keep this feeling of vulnerability that has been given to the world. And the feeling that, the fact that everybody embraced vulnerability and realized that things are so fragile and so soft and sensitive, irrespective of where you're coming from. And we are all humans, basic humans. And probably will give us an opportunity to start understanding each other better, because we were saying that we lose empathy. I think that we gained a lot into the empathy sector, suffering so much altogether. So I really think that this will continue, even though we will be able to kiss. I hope kissing is not going to harm this energy that has been given by vulnerability. I think on the contrary, it's going to be a next level of kissing, like a real one. Not just.
So do you feel, Adina, that in this new world, some of those things are just going to be really heightened? Those interactions are going to mean even more, because perhaps on Alec's point, that in other societal, we're in the shops or we're in public spaces, there's more space between people. So when we do come together, it's accentuated even further, and maybe the intensity of feeling and communication is heightened like that. And there's more to observe and learn from that as well.
I definitely hope it's going to be a next level of interaction after this. Even though the virus is not going to disappear, probably we will have a vaccine and so on. I really hope humanity will preserve these learnings about elevated human interaction that we got from this experiment.
Sorry, I have to laugh. I'm so pessimistic about humanity. I think history proved
it was a hope.
I think history proved you wrong, Adina. We never learned.
But I enjoy contradicting history. I enjoy.
We're going through a period of time where we've got case studies of behavior that we can go back to, and I think that's really interesting as well, that, it is a point in history which we will look back at and learn in education sphere in future years. But also as anthropologists and researchers, we have a living case study to look at how we're adapting, what we're doing. The example that I find really interesting in the UK is football. It's always football in the UK, but with stadiums with no communication from fans, there are more goals than ever before. Is that because the strikers are having less pressure? They feel less pressure from the crowd, or is it the defenders are having less urgency from the crowd? There's lots of studies looking at that at the moment, and that's one example of many. There's shopping changes, there's interaction changes that we've been talking about.
So interesting with the soccer, with the football. Yeah, wow.
Yeah, but we're living through lots of case studies that we can go back to and apply to wider learning and understanding about the way we've adapted and the impact of change. So that's one example of many, many hundreds that we could pick up on. But I think it's our duty as researchers to look at that and weave that into even something to do with, packaging or an NPD or proposition research. The wider cultural impact of change is something that we're living through, that I think we are debating today, that we need to consider with all of our projects, and learn from it.
Oh, absolutely. And I think also you talked about football, but I think you know that already consumer choices radically shift.
Yeah.
After that, after the panic buying and so on, you have the reorienting towards practices that point to emerging values. They're not yet there, let's put it like this, but they're like weak signals that that we can look at for the future, maybe 5 years, in terms of both consuming choices. We're not even talking traveling, retail traveling is a whole kind of that needs to be reinvented, I think that's something that we can look at, and values that Adina was talking about, like empathy, responsibility, communal or social responsibility, and so on. These are values that are reworked right now and re-hierarchized, right?
Yeah, and I wonder what's the most appealing game? A game where you fight and you talking about football. What is most enjoyable to watch a football game where there are a lot of scoring? There is a lot of scoring and no public, or a football game where there is a lot of public and energy and so on, and it's more difficult to score.
It depends where you are. If you are in the public, of course, you want to be in the public. If you're not,
but
maybe you like more goals. I don't know. It's
very much on the public. There is a business behind.
Yeah,
it's a public. Well, a lot of things to debate. Maybe we see again later on with different topics. Because Alan, it has been a joy to talk to you as usual.
Thank you.
Alan, sorry, Alec. Alan, it has been a joy to have you with us. The technology wasn't our friend today, and we couldn't be live on Facebook. But the whole discussion is already recorded, and we are gonna share it on all the social networks. I hope people will enjoy it as much as we did. And until we see again, we see each other in real life with real shots and drinks and so on, and hug and kiss, and so in a culturally relevant way. I say goodbye, and thank you very much for your presence today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.